Hi. So these are all sad psalms of David that he wrote while he was fleeing from Absalom and he was in just such a really bad place. And we'll just start from Psalm 3. And this psalm was written by David when he fled from his son Absalom. And in it, he expressed confidence in the Lord as his shield his protection against his enemies. In this case, it was his son, his mentor, and some of his friends and his people. God protects his people. In Ephesians 6:16, Paul described the shield of faith as providing protection against the power of evil. Absalom had turned the people's hearts against him, with all his antiques and winning them over. So David expresses some of their feelings towards him in this psalm when he says, "Oh, they wish me this, they wish me that." I felt really bad for him, but I know that ultimately, God did come through for him. Psalm 4. In this psalm, David was expressing his faith and trust in God as the one who gives safety to the faithful, the ones he set apart for himself. In verse 7 to 8, David spoke of God, of the joy and gladness given by God that trumped earthly provision and the peace that God gives to those who trust in him. For David, his heart had, in his heart, he had to submit the anger that he felt about the situation to God. He had to, he was facing a really bad situation, and obviously he was annoyed, he felt betrayed, angry, and he submitted that to God. That was something I saw, come through in these Psalms as well. In Psalm 12, David felt alone in his combat against evil. Like there were no good and faithful people in the world. He was just lamenting how it was just wickedness everywhere. He was concerned that there were mostly liars, duplicitous, and proud people surrounding him. They also oppress the poor and the needy, something that God is very clearly passionate about, because we saw even while he was giving the laws to the Israelites how the needy and the poor, the widow, the orphan always had to be taken care of. And so in verse 5, we see that's when God speaks, that's when God arises, and he, arises on their behalf like he always does. In Psalm 13, David expresses his trust in the salvation of the Lord. David starts out by feeling like God has forgotten him. He longed for the Lord's deliverance from sickness and from enemies. His tone changes in the later part as he confidently asserts that he was trusting God for his mercy, and he was trusting in God's mercy. Even though he felt forgotten, we understood that his feeling and his reality of who God are two different things. So how he felt, just most of us feel the same way. Oh, I feel so abandoned, I feel like God, but that that's not who God is, right? And he reminded his soul of God, and that's what we should always do every time we feel like, oh my God, has he forgotten me? Remember who God is and that he never forgets us. Psalm 28 echoes some of the feelings of Psalm 13 and sees David ultimately rejoicing in answered prayers. He cried out to God in his time of need when he felt alone and abandoned by God in his experience. His tone changed dramatically as he blessed the Lord for hearing his cry and glorified the Lord as his strength and his shield in the end. Much of what he expressed in the psalm was to see the Lord punish the wicked. I saw that, let this happen to the wicked, let that happen to the wicked. I actually noticed that. In Psalm 55, David is in this psalm, as in others, speaking against his enemies. He was speaking out against their betrayal, the betrayal and hurt of his friends, for the ones that had hurt him the most. David found himself betrayed by his son, by his counselor and mentor, and by many of his people. He feels so overwhelmed by hatred and betrayal that he wants to fly away and rest. That's what he said from verse 7 to 18. Oh, if I had wings, I'd fly away and rest. His prayer in verse 40, in verse 9, when he says, "Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongue," expressed the need for God to bring disunity among his enemies, those who had united against him, so that his enemies, who were previously his friends, would be scattered, and they wouldn't have. Remember, he also prayed for Ahithophel's counsel to be foolishness. So just for that not to be a unity and not to be conformity within their plan to destroy him. He did the right thing, though, in the end, by pouring his heart and his grief out to God and trusting in him. Those who trust in God will remain firmly established and unshaken in life's difficult times. So here's where I saw God in these Psalms. God is our ultimate protection, not just from our external enemies, but also from ourselves. We make bad decisions all the time, and we find ourselves in rough situations, but God is always there. In Psalm 28 verse 9, David said, "Save your people and bless your inheritance. Shepherd them also to bear them up forever." What an apt prayer for a fallen people like us, who like sheep often go astray. But thank God for Jesus, who is our good shepherd, who has rescued us and always comes back to bring us close to him. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope today's lesson has been a blessing. Tomorrow we'll go back and pick up from the cliffhanger that we left. We'll be sharing lessons from 2 Samuel 16 to 18, and I look forward to sharing that with you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.